So, hi, I'm Leslyn McBean-Clairborne. I'm the director at the Greater Ithaca Activity Center, known to most folks as GIAC. And I've been involved with and engaged, I would say, with the history of African Americans in the Ithaca community from their arrival in the early 1800s until now. Very significant history and wanting to make sure that it's not hidden. So this walking tour, oh my goodness, I'm trying to remember what year that was. I don't remember the year, but anyhow, there's been versions of the walking tour before. A number of people who were really interested in putting together this tour, updated tour for the community to make sure, like I said, that the history of African Americans in Ithaca did not just stay buried. I will say that African Americans began arriving in Ithaca in the early 1800s. Some came as slaves, mostly they were adolescents who came and they did domestic work and stable chores, work in stables. Many of them came as runaways to Ithaca, and others came as free persons from the mid-Atlantic states and from eastern New York. They arrived here in Ithaca, some bought land, and one of the places either that they landed on was the whole Wheat Street at that time, Wheat Street area there on the south side, now known as Cleveland Avenue. This is Cleveland Avenue, formerly known as Wheat Street. Now the name changed. The residents here have petitioned the local government to change the name from Wheat Street to Cleveland Avenue in honor of former New York Governor Grover Cleveland and also president after he died. So only because of a lot of the work that Cleveland did just in terms of the advancement of of people of color, and particularly Black African American folks here. Now, this street was always live. There were always celebrations here because it was the heart of the Black community. Literally the heart. Most Black folks who moved here either as fugitive slaves, those who escaped, those who came as free men and women, escaping the South, most of them, because this is where either abolitionists or people who work on the Underground Railroad, people who knew, directed them here. So a lot of them came and lived with folks here, not just on Cleveland Avenue, but throughout the South Side, but this was sort of the main hub. So it was always busy, there was always celebration, there was always a lot going on. So again, welcome to historic Wheat Street. Okay, now Cleveland Avenue. We're just gonna go down and I'll talk a little bit. African Americans began arriving in Ithaca from the early 1800s when they began arriving. And if you remember or know your history, in 1827, New York State ended slavery in the state of New York in 1827. And so there were parades, and that happened on July 5th. Now it's interesting because we talked about July 5th being in New York, the end of slavery for Black folks and the independence of Black folks. And so July 5th was the celebration of our independence, not July 4th. The Black people on Wheat Street did not celebrate July 4th as Independence Day. They celebrated July 5th as Independence Day because that was the day of the ending of slavery in New York State. Make note of that. We had cakewalks and parties and cookouts and everything happening on this street. I believe this is 106, or this house here, 106, 108, Cleveland Avenue across the street. This was Prince Spencer. That's 108, 106, somewhere in this area here. Yep, 106 and 108. That house right there. Prince Spencer and his family came here, arrived in 1839. They lived in this house until 1850. He was born in 1814, before slavery was abolished in New York State, and he gained his freedom because he was here in 1827. He was not free, but he was here. According to the census, Spencer was illiterate because the census tracked that back then, whether you could read or write, so that he was illiterate, and he worked as a common laborer, which was a lot of what the African Americans who moved into this community did, either professional work as barbers or laundry folks, but they also did a lot of common labor work. And although he was just a common laborer, he owned his home. Very important to note that it was owned. So this walking tour highlights former homes for some of the people who came here, including, for example, Zachariah Tyler, who was the pastor at the St. James A.M.E. Zion Church. Home of the Reverend Zachariah Tyler. Reverend Zachariah Tyler came to Ithaca from Maryland, and he was the minister for the A.M.E. Zion Church. He was also, and his son, John Tyler, were also they enlisted, like the Reverend Zachariah Tyler was he was the heart of the community, basically, and the person who encouraged our African-American young men to enlist to go fight in the Civil War for our freedom, as you know. So the Reverend and his son, John Tyler, his son was only 19, and the Reverend was 54 at that time. They both enlisted in the 26th United States Colored Infantry. And when we come up that side, you'll see there's a monument, which yours truly is very proud to have been one of a couple of people, 4 or 5 people involved in making that happen and erecting it in honor of those 26 men from Tompkins County who went and fought for our freedom. So this house was Tyler's house. They were part of Company B. He served in churches all over the place. His son John, who also, lived with him, that I just mentioned. John was the ice cream man up and down Cleveland Avenue and around this neighborhood selling ice cream. So he became known as the ice cream man. When John died, his widow, I believe, was one of the first widower to get a pension from the Army for him. Of course, the historic St. James A.M.E. Zion Church, the original structure was just a square stone building, and in 1828, 1833 is when it was formed. The pastor, the Reverend who came to sort of set this up, he came in 1828, and that was Henry Johnson. 1833, erected. It was a single-story structure that could seat, I think, around 200 people. It was just a brick bottom. That was too small a space, and so they added the second story in 1861, increased the capacity. 100 people first, increased the capacity to 200 when they added the other one, and then they added the bell tower a little later on and increased the seating capacity to now 400 because it was the place that we could go. In 1920, the church burned its mortgage, and that was on the 87th anniversary of its founding. And the next year, the Ithaca branch, and we did have one, of the NAACP organized at this church. The president of the NAACP at that time was a gentleman by the name of Allen B. Jones. And take it away. Tell them about Alpha Phi Alpha's founding at the church.
Well, it was here in, it was actually not on the actual founding date, December 4th, 1906, but in October 1906, what had been a reading group that became the Alpha Phi Alpha Society, but then decided to organize into a fraternity, held its first social meeting here, and it was open to the public. It was a conversation that addressed issues of racism. They were addressing readings from W.B. Du Bois and the publisher for the Atlanta Constitution, who was a white supremacist. And these competing views were discussed in this meeting open to the public. And that was the first social event that was held by the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which then sort of emerged officially as a fraternity on December 4th, 1906. So this is an important place, and the father of one of the founders, Henry Arthur Callis's father, Henry Jesse Callis, was also a pastor of St. James at one point prior to his son's arrival here as a student.
So is that why all the new alphas, when they come into town, they always come here and take pictures?
They come here and they are initiated here.
Yeah, okay.
At this church regionally, when the schedule permits.
Nice.
Because this place has such a resonance. I mean, it has to do a number of local Ithaca addresses.
Right.
I think it's also important. Thank you for that. I think it's also important to note that this was one of the key, and it's interesting because normally you don't know what places are on the Underground Railroad. They're supposed to be hidden, but they were not ashamed or clandestine about it. It was one of the key places on the Underground Railroad, and in some respects, churches throughout the history of slavery, churches in the North had a certain level of protection. In the South, they didn't. Right? White folks will, roll up into the church and go find whoever was hiding there. In the North, there was a little bit more protection. And so the church served as a place, on a key place on the Underground Railroad. Interesting enough, when we go on Cleveland Avenue, the church, behind the church is the home of the Jenkins family, or just obliquely behind the church. And when we used to be able on this tour to go into the Jenkins family home, there's a tunnel that goes from their house to the church. And, something that passed on from generations, because we didn't write down our stories, like, we hide slaves in the bottom here. No, the generations of women told that story about it. Because of insurance, reasons, we haven't been able to go into the home in a while. But if CJ's there, she'll probably say, tell you a little bit. Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and other abolitionists and key freedom fighters all came to this church. The recruitment of, when the recruiter came to recruit people for the Civil War, happened at the church. The church held what was called the Lyceum, the Zion Lyceum, which, was an afternoon of song and performances and all of those things. And of course, right next to the church is the parsonage, another place where some of those very freedom fighters and, leaders stayed as well. So that's that part. This is 111 and 111 Cleveland Avenue. This is the home of Thomas Jackson. Thomas was born in 1825 in Virginia, and he lived in this house somewhere in the 1860s or so. He came up this way. He was in Ithaca. He worked as a waiter at a hotel called the Seymour Hotel, and he also was a gardener, an avid gardener, and he Danielle, in his house also was Danielle. I can't remember if he was the son of Thomas Jackson. Yes, he was. But people remembered him as Faithful Danielle. He came here in 1858. and as a fugitive, and people again told that Ithaca is the place, to go where you can be safe. So he was here. Actually, in 1889, Thomas Jackson passed away, and if you haven't, at some point, I'd love anybody who wants to join me on a cemetery tour. There's a cemetery that's dedicated to a lot of these city cemetery that is dedicated to a lot of the African American folks who lived here, who were part of the Civil War, etc. Beginning in the 1840s, there was a significant migration from the South with a number, and that's where the majority of the folks who came, black folks who came to Ithaca and to Wheat Street, that's where they came from. That migration from the South, mainly arriving from Virginia and the Upper Maryland area. Now, this tour that we put together highlights a lot of the homes and places that were homes of some of the folks who came before and who were there. This is 119 Cleveland Avenue. 119 Cleveland Ave. I love this story. And so again, those of you who participated in the play last year learned about this. This was the home of, when he came back from the war, this was the home of Sylvester Susie. He was one of the people who had enlisted, went to war. Sylvester Susie was born in 1835, and he enlisted in Company B, again, of the United States Colored Troops. As a private, he later became a corporal. They had porches. Most of the houses had porches, and that's where you cut hair. They were all barbers. They didn't have to go to no barber school, learn how to cut hair. But they did that, and they did that for each other. Now, Sylvester Susie was a leader. He became known as Vet Susie. They all called him Vet Susie. And he led the parade on the 25th anniversary here in Ithaca of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1888. He was the person to lead that parade. All the properties on here are pretty much wooden structures. This is the most unusual one. And it was architecturally different for this community. It's like it was a brick house. You didn't find that on this property. Now this is 201. It's listed at 201 Cleveland Avenue. It was built as a rental unit somewhere around the 1870s or so. And also at this property was then sold to Adolphus Hailstork. Here's the interesting thing about Adolphus Hailstork. Hailstork became known as Dolly. He was a fraternity cook for the fraternity houses, but he also managed a laundromat, and it was a laundromat right across the street there that was owned by his father, one of the first African American owned businesses here in Ithaca. One of the first. Hailstork died in 2020. The house passed on to his wife, and who, by the way, was the principal of Danby and South Hill Elementary School. So, yes, we own businesses, we own homes. Now, just so you know, as I stand here on this corner, there were also Polish families and Italian families who lived in here, but they pretty much lived either Clinton Street or some on State Street, but they were part of railroad workers. If you go further out, just a block over, out there on 13, right in this block right here on 13, we had what was called the row houses. There were the 10 Commandment row houses that were also out there. When we do the trolley tour, we go all around, but we can't walk over that today. And it's hot and bugs
The
are
10
getting us.
Commandment Road.
So if you stand here and you look down this way, we go north. We're just going to go around and come back up. I have to show you all, of course, the Black Elks. We owned businesses, we owned homes, and
Watch that.
oh, this is where people met, musicians, accomplished bands, singers, all came and performed right here, and it was a gathering place. I mean, according to Cal Walker, this is where the cats came to hang, dressed to the nines. And we showed up, and it was the place. This is the place. I'm trying to make sure I have my notes right on it. Also, where we have the Henry Highland Garnet. Do you have it in your brochure?
The Forest City Lodge.
Yeah, the Forest City Lodge is the information. The first chapter of the Eastern Stars here in Ithaca, established right here in 1900. As well as, I'm trying to find my portion about the Henry. Yep, here it is. Henry Highland Garnet Masonic Lodge. The Black Elks right here. There, the establishment in 1884 of that chapter of the Henry Highland Garnet Lodge occurred right there, and they're still affiliated. And then, so yes, it's where we hung out. It's where we partied, right, Mona? Right there.
Well, one of the members of that lodge, late Reverend Clarence Welch, used to be there. He actually used to cut hair there. I got my hair cut there once.
Yep.
You probably don't think I get my hair cut, but I do.
This is the Cook family home. Let me see this home. And another amazing seamstress. This home, the Cook family came to Ithaca from Virginia in the 1890s. This home has been passed from mother to daughter. So there are 3 daughters. Yes, mother and 3 daughters, and it's been passed on from mother to daughter. This is the home I said we used to have an opportunity to go in, to just see that tunnel. The church is behind it, right behind it, and it served not only as a boarding house for workers who were working on the Ithaca to Owego Railroad, but it also served as a spot on the Underground Railroad. So very important. Hi, CJ. So this is 501 West Green. 501 was the home of Levi and Ora Spaulding. Levi Spaulding was Ithaca's first African-American policeman, who also died in the line of duty. He served from 1919. You have this in this one, from 1919 until 1930. Levi operated a barbershop. His wife Ora was a hairdresser. She owned a hair salon and in a hotel that was owned by a man of color on West State Street. So there is a monument, a plaque
on Seneca Street.
On Seneca Street that was erected by the current Ithaca Police Department, honoring Mr. Spaulding at about the place where I believe he lost his life. This stop was also noted on the Underground Railroad. This right here was also noted. Now, we have gone into many, Jared's done this with me a few times, we've gone into many homes along the way because people would allow us to come and see. You know, this is one of the homes, as well as the Macera family home, which is on the corner of Geneva and Green. And Green Street is a big brick building where there were trap doors under the linoleum, whatever it is, of the kitchen. Right now, there was argument about whether it was for coal or whether it was for people. But you can see the size of it and know that, okay, people didn't have that small amount of coal. And then you can also see where it went. So this is one of those homes that has that in it. And the Massera family home, we've also, noticed that. And you can see signs, those who have preserved it. The Massera family home, for example, has etchings, in it that tells you there were people there who were counting days or something. So again, home of Levi Spalding, Ithaca's first African-American police officer, died in the line of duty, and as a very significant spot on the Underground Railroad. Pretty much, if you notice, all of these were very much connected, and they were all very close to the church. So I did want to make sure that, people had a chance to just really see this, because it's so important to honor these folks who came from Tompkins County and fought for the freedom of African Americans. 26 soldiers of the 26th Regiment of the United States Colored Infantry. They said they left, came back with a different name. Families still live in Dryden and other parts of Tompkins County. We're still researching a lot of that history. This monument, so I tell people, some crazy parts, but this monument was designed by the person who designed done by the person who designed and did the Civil War Memorial in Washington, D.C. We commissioned that person to do that because we wanted it to be very, very done well and significant. And then a few years ago, Jara, who was it, put up the flagpole?
Oh, the Sons of the Union Soldiers.
Right, we had a whole ceremony because we thought there needed to be a flagpole honoring these folks. So here are your 26 who serve, including some of the people I talked about, Zachariah Tyler, Sylvester, Dorsey. We've got a whole bunch of people here. John Sorrell, the Sorrell family, they're from Dryden. And there's still, family you can talk to. Lots of Smiths, very popular name, because as you can imagine, it was a very popular name of slave owners. And you took the name of your owner, so very popular name. George Gwynn was in our play last year. I don't remember who was George, but George was in the play last year. And so I just wanted to point that out. The church is also doing a dig, an archaeological dig, because I think part of it is also sort of uncovering that tunnel that goes back there. So there's a dig that's happening. Question?
Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. That's the group that put the flag and put the pole and the flag up.
Awesome.
I've got a little stone down there. Marks the date and everything.
Oh yeah, there it is. It's behind it. Interesting enough, they also talked about how they were treated coming back. Like they weren't allowed to march in the parade. Right? They didn't get the same, pensions and monies as the white comrades. So they talked a lot about some of what happened to them when they returned. They felt they had more camaraderie and more support when they were in than when they were out. And so they found their heroship on this street because no one else would recognize them as such. And that's why it was so important for us to make sure that there is recognition of them. The Southside Community Center, and I'll read this because I think it's so important, opened in 1927 with the ceremony attended by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. The Southside House is what that was, now known as the Southside Community Center. It began as an idea of the Frances Harper Women's Club and its members, who just believed, and these were black women who just believed in community betterment, inspired by, the life of other folks. Frances Harper lived from 1825 to 1911. She was an abolitionist, she was an activist, she was a poet, and one of the founders of the National Association of Colored Women. The members sponsored mother and daughter dances and dinners and all these things to, not only raise money, but just sort of bring community together. They engage in what we call community mothering. So I said how the community just really sort of supported and nurtured each other. In 1930, they changed their name to the Serve Us League, SERV-US, big U, Us League, and broadened membership, including men, into their membership. There were 11 initial members who canvassed the neighborhood for funds for a community center to be non-sectarian, it was very important, and non-political. Very important to note, with efforts directed toward uniting the Black community for the betterment of each and every individual. That was, again, another very important thing to note. Community leaders aided, and by 1932, they raised enough money to buy the house, which was at 305, remember the Southside house, which was right here, South Plain Street. They rented the upstairs apartments for income. There was a house, and the level downstairs here was used for programming. Now, it's really important to note something about this house. I mean, people think it's just, it's here, this is what it is. It was specifically for these women important that it looked out upon Cleveland Avenue, and that the people in Cleveland Avenue, when they look up, will see something that was about unification of their community. Very important to note. And on that note, I'll tell you a quick little story. Anyhow, they rented the upstairs. In 1935, there was a flood. This was still the house. There was a flood that threatened the house, and a new building was needed. The women, the Service League, got money from the federal government support. A local campaign brought in $10,000. They did a local campaign at that time. That's big money. And James Gibbs was hired as the first director, and now the Southside and GIAC combined gave a scholarship in the name of Mr. James Gibbs. Also, the Rotary Club, and I can't remember, is he an Alpha?
Who's that?
Mr. Gibbs.
I don't know, but I don't think so. But I don't know.
There's a fight between the Alphas and the Omegas and who claims him. One of y'all, he belongs to one of y'all.
I'll figure it out.
The property was deeded to the city of Ithaca in 1936. Ground was broken here for the new Southside Community Center. Isaiah Murray was elected as the president of the board of managers at that time of the Southside, because it was sort of group ran. Although they had a director, it was sort of group ran. And Vera Irving of the Serve Us League was a member, stressed that it would be a safe place for children and community, and it has remained as such. The final cost of building the Southside Community Center was under $50,000 to build this beautiful place. It was more than double the original estimate, but they tried to put everything in here that we needed for this community to have a place to call their own. The gymatorium, they call it wasn't a gymnasium, it was the gym/auditorium, and so it was literally called a gymatorium, was named in honor of Jerome Broad Holland. We did that naming and erected a plaque in the gym a few years ago. He was a Cornell student, athlete. He was an All-American football player. And no, he was a member of Omega Psi Phi.
Yeah.
I remember that now.
Yeah.
But he was also a scholar. He became ambassador. He worked for the World Bank. He did a number of things, and so we wanted to make sure that he was honored.
He was president of Hampton Institute.
Yes.
Also.
Yes. The Southside Center became a focal point of culture and social activities. The Drs. Galvin, Corinne Galvin, who was the first PhD from Cornell University, first Black woman to get a PhD from Cornell University
In English.
in English, yes, and her husband, Dr. Alex Galvin, who medical doctor. They lived only a couple of blocks away there, but they came here and provided services. She taught English, and she also taught, which we were pushed to have back, African studies and heritage. Like, she wanted children to understand where you came from. They did rites of passage, everything here. Girl Scout troop started, all of it right here at the Southside Community Center, and it became the focal point for lots of what was happening here in this neighborhood. Ta-da! In general, I just want to share with folks that there is an amazing African American heritage walking tour of the historic South Side, and we want to encourage people to join us on that tour. Take it virtually, which is what we're offering now, and reach out if you want to actually do a walkthrough. And it's important to us that people recognize just the rich, significant, and intriguing history of that Cleveland Avenue. Walking down it, you wouldn't think there's anything there. Most people probably know of the church, but you don't know of so much more that happened on that street.